Welcome back, everybody. It's Timothy here with Mana Rocks. This is going to be part 2 of our Day 2 spoilers for Ikoria, a set where every single card is good for some reason. If you haven't checked out the first half of today's spoilers, please do so. Do it in whatever order you want. I don't care. But we're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off, so not too much of an introduction here. We already talked about maybe the first 30-ish spoilers for today, and we'll go ahead and jump into the second half all the way up until whatever the most recent spoiler is when I hit the top of this list. But let's go ahead and just jump right on into it with Trumpeting Gnar. I always love the Gnars. There's like other Gnars in Magic, whatever. Anyway, this card is kind of nuts. It's 1 blue-green, Simic creature for all you Simic players out there. It's a 3/3 uncommon beast, and it says whenever this creature mutates, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. So cast this for its mutate cost, which is 5, 3, and Simic hybrid mana. Just make an additional 3/3. So you add 6 power to the board if you cast this for its mutate cost. I guess that's not actually true. You don't actually add the 3/3 worth of stats off of this. But you do get an additional 3/3 token. And then this is the type of card. We mentioned this. I forget what the other one was. Oh, the 5 mana 6/6 that gives you permanence every time you mutate. This is very similar, where it kind of mitigates the risk of mutating onto the same creature over and over again, right? Because you make this one pile, you put all your resources, all your eggs in one basket, and then your opponent removes that creature, and you just lose the entire stack and all the abilities, right? This is a little bit different because every mutate creature you put onto that stack, you will create a 3/3 beast token and, kind of get a card's worth of advantage. Even if your opponent ends up killing the stack, you still get all those tokens. So this is really nice. 3 mana 3/3, already good stats. You can just play this on turn 3 and then mutate onto it later on. Or if you get to 5 mana, you can just throw this into a stack you've already got or onto another creature that could be upgraded by 3/3. And you're going to create beast tokens. It's worth noting, too, that it seems like having cheap creatures in your deck might be pretty important because, again, in order to mutate, you have to have other creatures on board. So it might be one of those formats where it's really important that you have 1s and 2s in your deck so that you can mutate onto other creatures. But I mean, even if you start off with a Trumpeting Gnar and then mutate onto this, the fact that you get the mutate trigger regardless of what you do with the actual mutate creature is pretty crazy to me. And there are going to be some really swingy games. Like, if you don't kill this right away, then you basically lose. Ooh, I do not like that alternate art quite as much as the original there. It's not very Simic-y. It's just yellow and brown. All right, so enough about the Gnar. Let's go ahead and keep things moving. We got a lot to talk about. Reconnaissance Mission. Recon is 2 blue for an uncommon enchantment with Cyclone for 2 mana. Already love it. If that was the entire card, I'd be like, yeah, that's probably playable. It says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So you've got a Biden of Thassa effect on an uncommon, or Coastal Piracy, whatever you want to call it. Biden of Thassa obviously had a little bit of extra text, but it was vulnerable as an artifact enchantment, so it was vulnerable to a lot of removal. This is just an enchantment that pays you off for having a bunch of small creatures that can get in there, and it's a May ability. You don't have to draw extra cards, but it's probably fine. The Cyclone deck, I haven't seen too many payoffs for the actual Cyclone deck. It looks like it's in Jeskai colors for the most part, based off of the Jeskai Commander card that we saw, but there's another one that we'll see here in a little bit. And then there was the red creature that shoots your opponent for 1 whenever you cycle. And we'll see a fox here in a little bit as well that gets bigger when you cycle. But this seems like a card that if you are positioned to make a bunch of tokens or you've got evasive creatures or small flyers, this is a nice card to curve into and just start getting advantage off of it. Again, any uncommon that can draw you multiple cards per turn is worth looking at, and this one cycles when you're behind or when you're not in a position to be attacking. So this is normally an effect you would see on a rare. In fact, Coastal Piracy and Biden of Thassa are rares, but it's an uncommon and it has Cyclone on top of it, which to me is a pretty pushed uncommon. Back. All right, moving on. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this. Savai Sabertooth is 1 and a white for a 3/1 vanilla creature. It's a cat because the 3/1 vanilla creature spot always has to be a cat. Leon into the Lost Tribe, Resco Swiftclaw, blah blah blah, Six Paths, whatever. It's funny. I wonder how many functional reprints there are of this card that are all cats. Right? We haven't seen anything that actually cares about cats yet. There might be some like random cat tribal card, in which case this gets a little bit of an extra nod. But for now, it's just vanilla 3/1. Vanilla creatures might be relevant if you go turn 2 3/1 and then you mutate onto it. You know, it served a purpose. Wingfold Terran. Alright, here we go. Wingfold Terran is 5 and a blue for a 3/6 common dinosaur. Mono blue dinosaur. I think Nezahal is the only other mono blue dinosaur. When Wingfold Terran enters the battlefield with your choice of a flying counter or a hexproof counter on it. Alright, that's what I was looking for in this set. Now, this is obviously expensive, and it can't gain both. You don't get to choose hexproof and flying, but I think they deliberately made a hexproof creature in this set, and they made it expensive. Like 6 mana 3/6 is not great. 3 mana 6/3 flyer would be okay, but you're gonna give this hexproof, and the reason hexproof matters so much is because of mutate. You can mutate onto a hexproof creature, and it's invulnerable to targeted removal, right? Your opponent can't deal with that big stack, so you just go mutate onto this, mutate onto this, mutate onto this, and you get to build this monster with a bunch of abilities that your opponent can't really interact with. So I don't know if this is going to be a super fast format. It seems like it might be a little bit on the slower side, but the effects are really swingy and big. So if it does end up being a slower format, Wingfold Terran is going to be a terror to deal with, because you can just mutate onto it and your opponent can't stop it. Whereas other people are, I don't know. It reminds me of that Cold Water Snapper from Dominaria, the 4/5, maybe it was a 5/6 or something. I don't know. It was just a big dumb hexproof creature, but as soon as you put something on it that gives it flying, or you give it some extra ability, it just completely dominates the game. So I'm a little weary here of the hexproof counters. Hopefully there aren't too many other good hexproof creatures in this format, but Wingfold Terran, I've got my eye on you. Alright, so we've got a cycle here. I guess Seb McKinnon just does the art for every card now, which is cool, because, you know, the art's pretty neat here. But Mythos of Nethroi is 2 and a black, instant, and it says destroy target non-land permanent if it's a creature, or if green-white was spent to cast this spell. So I think the way this cycle is going to work, we've only seen, I think, 3 of them, but it gives you a strict mana cost. You have to pay black for this, and then it rewards you by paying the additional colors in that that triome, in that Apex's colors, right? So Nethroi is black, green, white. It's Abzan colors, or Nethroi colors, if you will. And this card rewards you if you manage to pay all 3 colors for that spell, which means this would have to be black, green, white, strictly, in order for you to get the extra bonus. And it's not really an extra bonus, it's more of like you can target more things, right? So for 3 mana, for 2 and a black, you can just destroy a creature, right? Because it says destroy target non-land permanent if it's a creature. You get that option regardless of what you spent, as long as you can cast this card. But if you spent black, green, white, you can destroy any non-land permanent. It basically just opens this up to be a removal spell for artifacts and enchantments, planeswalkers as well, right? So you can play this in like a black and blue deck. You can play this in a mono black deck, but it rewards you and gives you more options if you play it in that actual wedge, or in that color combination, which I think is really cool. And just to kind of drive this home, we'll go ahead and look at the next one, which is Mythos of Spandex and Snapdax, whatever. I'm going to call him Spandex. I think that's just a cool name. 2 white for a rare sorcery, and this is Tragic Arrogance. It says each player chooses an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, or a planeswalker, and a planeswalker from among the non-land permanents they control, and they sacrifice the rest. This is a Tragic Arrogance where each player gets to choose what they're keeping, right? They get to keep one of each permanent, you sacrifice the rest. So everybody's gonna be left with 1 creature, 1 artifact, 1 enchantment, so on and so forth. Basically, this is going to, in limited, kill all the creatures on board except for each player's best creature. But it says if black-red was spent to cast this spell, you choose the permanents for each player instead. So it becomes an actual Tragic Arrogance where you get to choose everything if you spend white, black, red, which is a pretty costly price to pay for a card that's very mana restrictive. Thankfully, you don't usually want to run a card like this out on turn 4, so it gives you some time to kind of develop your mana and get there. you want that black-red for this card, though. The difference between having everybody choose what they sacrifice and you choosing for them is incredibly different. Like, this card is okay, but not very exciting for 2 white. But for black, red, white, it becomes an absolute bomb of a card. Tragic Arrogance, and I'm talking limited and commander here for the most part. In Commander, I think Tragic Arrogance is one of the best board wipes in the entire format, and people just still have not caught on to how good it is and how, like, it's just better than a Wrath of God. It's better than, I don't know, any other white board wipe I can think of off the top of my head. Like, it's better than a Terminus because it deals with all of the creatures that you need to deal with. Of course, maybe your opponent's playing Voltron, they only have one creature, and they get to keep it, like Narset or something. But for the most part, if they have a Thopter on board, they're going to lose everything else, and it kills all the enchantments, all the artifacts. It just does so much. In Limited, you get to, if you're the one who chooses, you get to make your opponent keep their worst creature, and you get to keep your best creature. Now, if your opponent's worst creature is an 11/11 Trampler, this card's not going to get the job done. But in most games, your opponent's going to have like a token or a 2/2 on board. You can make them keep that. They lose every other creature, and you get to keep your best creature. So if you draft this card, you can play it in like a white-green deck or a mono-white deck or whatever, but you want to really make sure you've got that red and black mana because it goes through the roof if you're able to do it. That's basically all just prefacing, saying, hey, you should be playing Tragic Arrogance in Commander. All right, Monstrous Path is 4 and a green for a sorcery. Target creature gets +7/+7 until end of turn. That creature must block. I think this is supposed to say that creature must be blocked if able. I think this translation is incorrect. So we're going to assume that, right? It wouldn't make sense to say a creature must block as a sorcery, right? So we're going to assume this is +7/+7 for 5 mana, and the creature must be blocked until end of turn. It doesn't have to be blocked by everything, so your opponent can just chump. It doesn't give trample, so your opponent can just chump. But if you put this on a trampler, and there are like trample counters and stuff like that in this set, plus it seems like red-green has kind of a trample theme in general, then you can use this to just eat a creature and get a bunch of extra damage in. A lot of times, this is just going to be like a burn spell that kills your opponent's worst creature, is how it functions. But it's also got Cyclone. And Cyclone, I can beat a dead horse with this. Cyclone just makes cards better, right? This is a situational card. Sometimes, your opponent is just making an army of 1/1s, and it doesn't really do anything. Sometimes it eats your opponent's best creature because they only have one creature. And in those situations where this card just isn't good, you can cycle it away and find something else. So a little bit situational. I'm not sure if we'll be main deck in this card or not, but if Tramplers are prevalent in this format, if there's just a bunch of Trample creatures or trample counters floating around this format, then yeah, this card gets a little bit better. Next up, Proud Wild Bonder. So bonders are like creatures or people on Ikoria that like make a connection with a creature or something like that. I don't know. I didn't read the whole lore. Anyway, Proud Wild Bonder. This is a 2 Gruul, so Gruul hybrid mana, 4 mana total for a 4/3 Trampler. Trampler, give it +7/+7, must be blocked. It says creatures you control with trample you may have this creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't blocked. So I was under the impression, I read somewhere that they were going to be keywording this ability, this whole you can super trample over things as unstoppable, but I guess that was either not true or is not happening. But how do we feel about this card? So a 4/3 Trampler that says your Tramplers can assign combat damage as though they weren't blocked. Well, on its own, this means that this represents 4 damage at any time it attacks, right? Even if your opponent blocks it, you can push that 4 damage over onto your opponent, as well as all of your other Tramplers, which is a very powerful ability to have. The downside, though, is if you choose to do that, you're not dealing damage to whatever is actually blocking. So a lot of times you'll get some damage in on your opponent, but you'll lose your creature, and you won't actually trade off for your opponent's creature because you didn't deal damage to their creatures, you dealt damage to them. So I think this card is really good, and it does kind of highlight that red-green is, the trample archetype for this format. Plus, sometimes you can just win a game if you have a big trampler on board. Again, I just want to point out, there's an 11/11 trampler in this set. Just saying. We saw a rare, too, that was like a 7 mana 8/8 Trampler with haste. If your opponent can't block the damage and can't stop you from pushing in for lethal, there's not a lot that they can do, right? Sometimes they have to just throw a blocker in and reduce the amount of trample damage. This card says, no, you can't do that. And it plays extremely well with pump spells, too, where it stops your opponent's creatures from killing you in combat while still getting extra damage through on your opponent. So keep an eye on this archetype, this red-green trample archetype. We'll see if it's an actual thing. And it feels like the archetypes are like red-black is like the menace archetype or something like that. I don't know. I'll have to see more of the gold uncommons to kind of give me an idea. Next up, Dreamtail Heron. This is the card that every limited player wants. It's 5 mana, 4 and a blue for a 3/4 flyer that when it mutates, draw a card. Bingo. Also, mutate for 3 and a blue. So if you put this onto another creature, you can make that creature a 3/4 flyer with a bunch of other abilities and draw a card immediately. So it makes up for itself. Again, any of these things that that replace themselves with another card or another creature or something like that, they are very good mutate creatures. And, you know, a 5 mana 3/4 flyer is not a terrible card as it is, right? That's playable. That's kind of like par for the course when it comes to a common flyer these days. So you can just play this out and then maybe eventually mutate onto it later in the game, draw more cards. Seems really strong. Now, what I haven't noticed is any cheap mutate costs. We haven't seen like something that can mutate for 1 mana or 2 mana. I think the cheapest one so far has been 3, if I remember correctly. I think the cat, the 3/4 for 4 mana, had mutate for 2 and a white, and there might have been some other ones that mutate for 3. But I don't know if they're going to make a mutate card, or if we're going to see a mutate card that mutates for like just 1 or 2 mana, because that seems like it would just chain off abilities extremely easily. It would probably be at least an uncommon if we saw that, but Dreamtail Heron is going to be the type of card that you're going to want in limited. Seems really strong to me. Another quick one, another sideboard card with cycling, therefore a main deck card. Wilt destroys target artifact or enchantment. You can cycle it for 2 mana. It costs 1 and a green instant speed. So natural wise, but you can cycle it for 2 mana. Seems fine to me. There are definitely some enchantments that are worth destroying. We've seen a couple really good ones, like the Biden of Thassa type card. There's also the green-blue enchantment that can put counters on your things or draw you cards if you have the biggest creature on board. So yeah, I would err on the side of trying to main deck this sort of card if you're not looking for cuts. You know, if you're looking for cuts, then it's still better to play a solid, good card than a situational cycling card most of the time. But if you just need an extra card in your deck, then something like Wilt, just fine. It cycles. And notice that the cycling costs in this set, they're all generic mana. I don't think we've seen any cycling costs that actually require colored mana. That's not true. The Trample counter and Death Touch counter one had colored mana. But most of them are just cheap cycling cards. You can play this in a white deck if you want, just to, you know, have another cycling card to trigger your cycling payoff. So, Wilt seems fine to me. We got a big bad dinosaur on our hands here. Quartz Forest Crusher. I assume that's like Crusher of the Forest of Quartz or something like that. 2 red, green. Trample. There you go. The Trample archetype. This is a 6/6 dinosaur beast. Another 5 mana 6/6. This one with Trample. And it says whenever one or more creatures you control with Trample deal combat damage to a player, create an XX green dinosaur beast token with Trample, where X is the damage dealt to that player. This is so cool. So, first off, let's say this is best case scenario. I attack with this thing, my opponent doesn't block. They take 6 damage from my Tramplers, and I make a 6/6. Let's say they block with a 3/3 Death Touch, okay? They want to get this thing off board. They know I'm going to get some value, but they have to get it off board. So they block with a 3/3 Death Touch. Well, I'm going to trade for the Death Toucher, but I'm also going to trample over for 3 damage, and that'll trigger and make a 3/3 Trampler, right? Let's say I have this on board plus another 4. I have the 4/3 Trampler, right? My opponent can't stop the amount of the damage I'm doing because even if they block, I can have them assign damage. Well, I push in for 10. I probably lose my creatures, but then this triggers and makes a 10/10, right? So it's always going to make an XX equal to however much damage you dealt to them, even though they might soak up some of the damage with their blockers, right? And that means if you don't kill this immediately, you're going to win the game, right? Because if you didn't kill this the first time, you're probably not going to do a very good job of killing it the second time. And that means you're just generating more Tramplers, which means you're going to be generating even bigger Tramplers. And this gets like, I don't know if exponential is the right word. It gets multiplicative, that's for sure. Where if you can't deal with this the first time, you're going to create a 6/6. And then you're going to be attacking with 2 6/6 tramplers, and if you can't deal with those, you're probably dead. But if you're still alive somehow, you just make a 12/12, and everything has trample. So this card seems kind of nuts. Pretty heavy mana requirement, but we've seen some mana fixing already, and you need to deal with this card the turn it comes down, or else you're probably going to lose the game. Pretty sweet. All right, Dire Tactics, good removal spell. White-black, instant. Exile target creature, no questions asked. If you don't control a human, you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. That could be a big deal in a set where creatures can get up to like 11/11s or something like that. Imagine if this is your answer to Colossification. You just have to lose 20 life in order to get rid of the creature. The thing is, if you control a human, you don't lose any life at all. This is just 2 mana, exile a creature, boom. That's about as efficient of a removal spell as you're ever going to get in Limited. That's close to like a Swords to Plowshares or a Path to Exile when it comes to Limited. And you don't have to have a human to cast this. It's just that you're going to lose some life if you do. So I think it's kind of nice, again, that the white, black, red, maybe human stuff looks a little dorky in this set when you can't mutate onto those humans. But if they're going to get removal spells like this, that means they're going to be able to hold their own, right? And the fact that you can just run this out without a human is pretty powerful and just take the life loss. And then the fact that sometimes this is just 2 mana exile creature, no downside at all. Pretty good. Be careful if you have like 1 human on board and you're about to exile a big creature. Your opponent can kill the human in response and you're going to lose the life after you've targeted. You still exile their creature, but that might be a game-losing play if you're not careful. Seems really strong to me. Humans definitely have some pushed cards here. Fiend Artisan. This is a Termaglyph and Birth and Pod, but whatever. Fiend Artisan is black, green, 2 mana total, any combination of black or green. It is a 1/1 Mythic Nightmare that gets +1/+1 for each creature in your graveyard. So in Limited, you only need like 2 creatures in your graveyard before this becomes just an excellent card, even though that won't happen by turn 2. So you're really looking at a late game card. You do not want to run this out on turn 2 as a 1/1 and then just hope that other creatures fill your graveyard, unless you've got like turn 3 or 4 plays that mill yourself. Then that might be something worth considering. It's got an activated ability, X and a Golgari mana. So 1 black or red mana plus X, tap it, sacrifice another creature. So that's all the cost. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. Activate only as a sorcery. It is a very powerful effect, right? You have a 4/4 on board. Okay. Pay 4 and a black. Sack it and go search for any other creature that costs 4 or less. A Birth and Pod, if you will. It doesn't go up the chain, it goes down the chain, but it also fills the graveyard, which means that the Fiend Artisan starts getting bigger too. This is a toolbox card. It's not insane in Limited, because sacking like a 4-drop to go get a 4 or 3-drop isn't exactly a good thing, but it's a little bit of a utility card. If you have key cards in your deck that are good against your opponent, this can go search them up. And it does require that you sacrifice creatures, but it also gets bigger while you do that. This is the type of card that requires, or not requires, but pays you off for having a lot of self-mill, which we've seen a decent amount of already, and there will be more. I don't think this is going to be like top 10 biggest bombs in the set, but it's going to be something that people are looking at for Constructed. Whether or not it ends up being a flop, I don't know, because it's a little bit slow, but I can see this card doing a lot of work, and in Limited, I think it's going to be pretty good. In Commander, I have no idea. There are probably just better options searching up creatures and stuff like that, but this does quite a bit for something like a Marin deck or, I don't know, a Mazarek deck or something that just cares about sacrificing and permanents. Corvold, I have no idea. Really cool card. Combination of abilities, I think leads into just being a solid creature, but we'll see whether it makes splash in Standard. Cavern Whisperer. It's like, shh. 4 and a black for a 4/4 menace. Whenever this creature mutates, each opponent discards a card. So we saw the, standard. We could have probably guessed there'd be like a creature that's like, whenever you mutate, draw a card. And this is kind of the opposite, which is whenever it mutates, discard a card. It's a little different. The blue one, 3/4 flyer. This one, 4/4 menace, both 5 mana. Standard cards, right? This is a nice way to make sure your opponent is losing resources. Again, drawing a card is better than making your opponent discard a card, but this thing has menace, and menace matters for at least a couple other cards in this set. So it seems like a solid role player. Not the best mutate creature that we're going to see, but certainly not the worst. And 5 mana 4/4 Menace is still a card that takes a little bit of work to get rid of off the board. So fine, seems like just a solid creature. Flourishin Fox. We talked last time about 1-drops and how they've been making 1-drop like role players in Limited at Uncommon that are really pulling their weight for a certain archetype. We mentioned Edgewall Innkeeper in Throne of Eldraine. We mentioned Hateful Eidolon. And then we saw the Mamba. It was a black creature that said whenever it mutates, it gives -2/2. And it was just a 1-mana black creature. And that was it. And it had this ability that paid you all for the archetype. Flourishin Fox is another one of those creatures. It is just a single white mana for a 1/1 uncommon fox. And again, that's kind of like what you get out of these cards. Just these generic 1 mana 1/1s. Hateful Eidolon was a 1/2 with lifelink, but whatever. This one says whenever you cycle another card, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it cycles for 1 colorless mana. So there you go. A cycling payoff creature. Not the most insane cycling payoff in the world, right? But a 1-drop that can, potentially get up to a 3-power or 4-power creature by pretty early in the game is nothing to scoff at. And I guess if you're playing a Cyclone deck, that you're probably pretty happy to play this, especially since this itself cycles. That's kind of the beauty of the Cyclone deck, is that a lot of your actual payoffs also have Cyclones. So if it's not the right card for the situation, you can cycle it away, and they each kind of feel each other. So I think it's kind of cool that they went out of their way to make the Cyclone cost just super cheap for these cards so that they can all kind of work together in a number of different ways. Flourishin Fox, fine. I don't know how the Cyclone deck's going to work in Limited yet, but it's certainly there. We have Channeled Force. This is 2 blue-red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard X cards. Target player draws X cards. It deals X damage to up to 1 target creature or player. So this is a card that... Is that Narset? That is Narset. Ooh, we're going to get a Narset. So here's the thing about this card. It looks bad. Like, when you read it, it sounds bad. It's like, oh, discard 2 other cards, deal 2 damage. But you draw those cards back. You're down the Channeled Force, so it's not like you net even on cards. But if you can turn this into a removal spell and kill something, and you replace all those other cards, then this card kind of netted even, right? It's basically a 1-for-1 that wheels whatever cards you want out of your hand. The thing is, you do have to have cards in your hand that you want to discard before this actually becomes good, and it doesn't cycle those cards or anything, so it's not triggering the other stuff that cares about cycling. But I don't know, it seems fine to me. It does require, like, if you want to kill a big creature, you have to discard maybe 3-4 plus cards, and this isn't even going to kill the biggest creatures that you have in the format. It also can't go to the opponent's face, which is a little disappointing, but it does let you kind of store up extra lands and stuff like that you don't care about, and then turn them into a removal spell plus other cards later in the game. It's like, I guess the best way to describe it is it's like a really expensive Torment Invoice that also doubles up as a small removal spell for a cheap creature or something like that. Doesn't seem incredible to me. It's the type of card that I might just be completely wrong about, since, it has a combination of powerful abilities. It just asks that you have a lot of cards that you're willing to discard, and also that you have a target that's going to die to like 3 or 4 damage, maybe tops. You're never going to like Channel Force for 7 and kill your opponent's best creature or something like that. I just don't see that happening. So Channel Force, seems okay to me, but seems like it requires a little bit too much work to be a standout card here. Moving on. Standout cards. Devour and Bite. How do we feel about that? It's 2 and a green for a sorcery. As an additional cost, reveal a creature from your hand. Devour and Bite deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the revealed card's power. So, green removal that cares about creatures. This one's a little interesting because it's not like a Prey Upon or a Rabid Bite or something where if the creature is removed, you don't deal the damage. You reveal it from your hand, and then the only thing they really have to interact with is this sorcery itself. It does ask that you actually have a creature in your hand that's worth revealing, that's big enough to kill whatever you're trying to target, but we're on a plane with... I keep mentioning the 11/11 Trample, but look, it's going to win a lot of games. The 11/11 Trample's no joke. If you reveal that, you're just killing a creature for 3 mana, and that's fine. Sorcery speed. Sometimes you'll top deck this when you already have creatures on board, and you'll wish it was a Prey Upon or a Rabid Bite or something like that. So it's got an interesting dynamic to it. It gives green another, way to directly just deal with creatures, but it's not free, right? It's not just 3 mana murder. It's 3 mana if I have a big creature in my hand, then murder at sorcery speed. So it is uncommon. It feels like, just run-of-the-mill removal at this point, and has a little bit of risk tied to it. All right, another one of our Mythos. This is a Mythos of Vadruk. This is the Jeskai one. 2 red, sorcery. It deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. Okay, if that was it, if this was 4 mana Pyrotechnics for 5, like 4 mana split up 5 damage, I'm in. That card is very good, right? You kill a 3/3 and a 2/2 with this. It can't go to your opponent's face, so it's not like you can kill your opponent's 4/4 and then ping them. But you're often going to kill at least a, reasonable creature because you can deal 5 damage to something. But sometimes you kill like a 4/4 and a 1/1 or a 2/2 and a 3/3 or a couple 2/2s and a 1/1 for the dream. Already very good at just that. And then it's got this extra bonus that says if white-blue was spent to cast this spell, until your next turn, those permanents can't attack or block, and their activated abilities can't be activated. So that gives you kind of an extra little thing. Sometimes, those extra little pings might go to waste if you have to target like a 6/6 or a 2/2 that you're not going to kill. Your opponent has a 4/4 on board, and you really need to kill that, so you go 4 damage to that, and I have an extra point of damage left over. It's just going to go to a creature. Doesn't matter. In this case, it actually does matter because that creature can't attack next turn and can't block you this turn, so it completely immobilizes them. It detains everything. You can also use this as like the world's most expensive Wrap in Flames for, white, blue, red. You go ping 5 creatures. They can't attack me next turn, and they also can't block, so swing in, and I'm not getting swung back at. Seems really strong to me. I don't think you need to go out of your way for the blue and the white on this one. Like, if I was just really heavy red and I found myself going into, like, Mardu colors or something, I wouldn't have to go out of my way to make sure I have blue for this, because just 4 damage to split up, or 4 mana to split up 5 damage is already really good. But, it's an extra added little bonus that's kind of nice to have if you're in the colors. Just, I think the base card here is good enough. Kind of like the black one. 3 mana kill a creature is good. You don't need to add the white and green in there unless you really need it. Fertilid is back. Fertilid, I love Fertilid. It's a good commander card. Good 2-headed giant card, too. Keep in mind, this can target your partner. Wink. 2 and a green for a 0/0 that enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters. You can pay 1 and a green, remove one of those counters, and have target player search for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, tap, and then shuffle your library. So, Fertilid, we've seen this card in a lot of, multiplayer product. It was in Battle Bond. It was in one of the Arch Enemy sets, and that is because it can target like a partner or a teammate or something like that. In Constructed, we're not talking about it for Constructed. In Limited, yeah, Fertilid's fine. Fertilid can target you and turn itself into additional lands. And this is a nice effect to have on a set that's going to push us into 3 colors. So another mana fixer that we're pretty happy to have. Fertilid's just a solid creature. Also note, if somehow you can get additional +1/+1 counters on Fertilid, you can turn that into extra value. There, I can see a world where you have the blue-green enchantment that says if you don't have the biggest creature on board, you put a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures, and that just turns Fertilid into an extra land. It's a little slow as far as mana fixing goes. It's vulnerable. It's not the best blocker, but it plays a role, and it plays it well as a mana fixer / mid to late game mana ramper. Ooh, Hate Bears. Man, do I love some Hate Bears. Drannith Magistrate is 1 and a white for a human wizard, and it says your opponent can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Okay, no casting spells from graveyards. Now, note that this doesn't stop creatures from, entering from the graveyard or entering from the library or whatever. Doesn't stop Derevi, because you can't stop Derevi. But they can't cast spells. So, in Limited, whatever. We're not going to cheat a lot of cards into play, and a lot of the cards that do cheat things into play don't cast them, so they can still enter from, abilities and stuff like that. But in Commander, you can't cast your Commander, because it's not in your hand, unless it is in your hand. But if it's not and it's in the command zone, Drannith Magistrate says you can't cast your Commander. This is actually very relevant for Commander, and I'm sure relevant for some Legacy format or other Eternal format, maybe Vintage, I don't know. But Drannith Magistrate seems pretty bad in Limited. If you need a human, it's fine, but it seems like that's all it does. Is it is a human in Limited with like, not embarrassing stats. Outside of limited and commander, it's actually very relevant. So I don't think this is anything you're clamoring for in limited, but I'd be interested to see how many people pick it up for commander. Yes, Masanostruben. I don't know, I completely butchered that. Mass Extinction. Yeah, that sounded about right. Mass Extinction is 3 and a black for a sorcery. Choose odd or even. Exile all creatures with that converted mana cost. With a converted mana cost of the chosen trait. This is weird because in limited, which is what this is aimed at, this is going to be a hard card to make work, right? This wants to be a board wipe, and in best case scenario, it wants to be a one-sided board wipe where it takes care of all of your opponent's stuff, but it's not always going to do that. Sometimes you have to make an odd choice. Get it? An odd choice? Sometimes you have to make a choice where it's going to exile a bunch of your stuff, or it's not going to hit the things you really want to hit because your opponent has 2 creatures that are killing you. One's even and one's odd. And sometimes it'll be a complete blowout where your opponent's playing the Kraken and decided that every card in their deck needs to have an even mana cost, and you're like, oh, well, Mass Extinction on even, and everything on your board is odd, right? So this is such a swingy effect. I think it's probably powerful enough that you can first pick this sort of card. I'm not sure that you actually just want it over like a premium targeted removal spell, though. I'm not sure how it's going to play out yet, because it's always going to get the one thing you most want to get. It's the question of whether or not it's going to take out too much of your own stuff, or if it's going to benefit you to actually cast this card. So Mass Extinction, a little bit finicky of a board wipe, and not even a full board wipe at that. Neutralize. This card is going to see a lot of standard play, I'm sure. It is 1 blue for an instant, counter target spell, cycling for 2 mana. So counter spells with cycling tend to be really good because you hold them up, and if your opponent doesn't play into your counter spell, you just cycle it away and draw a new card, and everyone's happy except your opponent, right? When your opponent starts cycling away counter spells, you're like, oh god, their hand is amazing. This reminds me of Censor from Amonkhet, which, kind of made waves and then died down and gets played in Pioneer right now. It's pretty popular in Pioneer, but Neutralize is very similar. If you're looking for a 3-mana counterspell, I think Neutralize might be the go-to now, right? Think of what's in Standard right now. Sinister, Sabotage. I don't even know what other 2-mana counterspells people are playing. Absorb. Absorb still plays a role, but you would play Neutralize over Sinister Sabotage, I think, because, having the option to cycle this away when it's a dead card is way better than, the upside of Sinister Sabotage, because sometimes that's stuck in your hand and Neutralize is never stuck in your hand. So I expect this to be a very popular card for standard purposes. In limited, it's cancel with cycling. Cancel's probably fine in a format where people are paying a lot for expensive cards, so I expect counterspells, cheapish counterspells, to be playable in this format, and I expect this to be a format where a cancel is fine, and just having cycling tacked onto that cancel and makes it even better. And here we go, draw 4 cards. Boon of the Wishgiver, 4 blue, uncommon sorcery. Draw 4 cards, cycling for 1. Again, the cycling costs are so generous in this format because last time we saw cycling was Amonkhet, and most of those, if not all of those, no, most of them. Some of them were generic, but a lot of the generic cycling costs 2 and maybe 3. We haven't seen anything that costs 3 unless it was colored mana and added an ability, right? This is so cheap. You just get to play a draw 4 in your blue deck, and if you are not in a position to be casting a draw 4, or it's really early in the game, you just cycle it away for 1 mana. Like, 1 mana lets you play other stuff that turn. If it's turn 3 and you cycle away, you use one of your mana to cycle something away, you can still play a 2-drop. That's pretty cheap. You can't do that with a 2 mana cycler. And then this has the upside of just being 4 mana draw 4 cards. This isn't even like one of those bad draw 4s where you have to then discard 3 cards or some nonsense like that, like Prying Eyes from the Ravnica set. That card sucked. I don't care who you are. Boon of the Wishgiver seems very powerful to me. It is uncommon, a very powerful uncommon. It's going to just give you a massive cards, and also can make up for the fact that you might be mutating onto the same creature, get that blown out, and then just restock with something like Boon of the Wishgiver. It is sorcery, so it's not like you can hold up counter magic or anything like that, but seems powerful to me. Moving right along, Skull Prophet. This is black-green for an uncommon human druid. It's a human, keep that in mind. It's a 3/1. and it has 2 activated abilities. You can either tap it for black or green mana, or you can tap it to mill yourself for 2. Put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Black-green obviously cares about its graveyard. We've seen quite a bit of that already, but this also functions as a mana dork, so if you don't need to fill your graveyard, then you use this for extra mana. If you don't need mana, you can start filling your graveyard, and it's a 3/1 for 2, which is a respectable body. Haven't seen a lot of ways to punish 1 toughness creatures yet, so seems fine to me. If you're black-green, you're happy to have this. If you're not, it's probably not a card you're interested in, so pass it along. Chittering Harvester. Alright, Chittering Harvester. 5 and a black for a 4/6 uncommon and nightmare. It has mutate for 5 mana, so a cheaper mutate cost. It says whenever this creature mutates, each opponent sacrifices a creature. This is not bad at all. So you can run this out as a 5 mana 4/6. It's not a very good card. But you really want to mutate this onto something else and have your opponent sacrifice something relevant. You know, we say this every time a set has another sacrifice effect, that sacrifice effects, or edicts as they're called, are not particularly amazing and limited, because your opponent will often have a creature that's just dead on board, like a 2/2 or a 1/3, or just, they sometimes have tokens, right? There are cards in this set that make 1/1 human tokens, and they'll just be like, okay, I'll sack this human, so what? So sacrifice effects aren't super amazing, but when you can repeatedly do them, they get a little bit better, and when you're adding real stats to the board, that matters too. You know, a 4/6 for 6 isn't exciting. 4/6 for 5 is okay, actually pretty decent, and even if it gets rid of a token or something, you're getting some sort of value off of it, but you're also setting yourself up to be able to do it again, so your opponent has to be careful about running like single creatures out on the board, or sometimes they have to overcommit so that they don't have to sack their best creature or something like that. So another role player, this seems very similar to the 4/4 menace for 5 that makes them discard a card. It's just like, okay, if you're trying to disrupt your opponent in some way but giving them some control over what's going to happen, then you can play that card. Another mythic rare here, Mythic Human. General Kudro of Dreneth is 1 white black 3 mana for a 3/3 legendary human soldier. It is a mythic rare. Gives your other humans +1/+1, so a human lord. We've already seen black white definitely cares about humans in this set. There's a couple uncommons, a couple other commons that care about humans. It has 2 abilities. It says, first off, whenever General Kudro of Dreneth or another human enters the battlefield under your control, exile target card from an opponent's graveyard. So take that reanimation strategy. And it triggers on itself too, which is kind of nice. Just you automatically get a 3 mana 3/3 that exiles a card out of an opponent's graveyard. That's fine, right? Your other humans also additionally exile cards. It's probably fine as well. The real ability here, the real thing you care about on top of the Lord ability, is for 2 mana you can sack 2 humans to destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Alright, humans got something to deal with the big threats here. If you don't have removal in your deck, hopefully you have a bunch of humans, because this can just sacrifice tokens to destroy your opponent's best creatures, which is a very powerful ability. It's also not restrictive, like it can sacrifice itself, so General Kudro plus another human is enough to take out your opponent's biggest threat. Hopefully you find a way to generate a bunch of human tokens. We haven't seen like anything that makes a mass of human tokens yet, right? We saw the uncommon that can pay 4 mana, exile a card from a graveyard to make a 1/1, and that's obviously really good, but it's mana intensive, and General Kudro also costs mana, so I don't know, we'll have to see if there's like a raise the alarm type effect or something that makes multiple humans at once, in which case you want that card if you're playing General Kudro. Also, you know, another human commander, we saw the commander card, the Mardu one that makes human tokens and pumps your humans. This is just another legendary human that you can play as your commander if you want white-black humans or something. I don't know. It seems really powerful for limited and a potential option for commander. If not as the commander, definitely a card that you want in your human deck. All right, and then we've got a couple more here, some commons and uncommons, I believe. Phase Dolphin, Elemental Whale. Phase Dolphin is a common 1/4 elemental whale creature, and when it attacks, another target attacking creature can't be blocked this turn. There you go. So if 2 of these attack, neither of them can be blocked. This is the type of card you want with that reconnaissance mission or Biden of Thassa card. This is what you want when you have an 11/11 trampler on board. this is what you want when you have a 6/6 that makes another 6/6 when it deals combat damage. I feel like this card has a good purpose in this format, and it's a decent early blocker. You know, in Eldring, we had that Mistford River Turtle, and that card sucked. It never got the job done, even though it was trying to do exactly what Phase Dolphin is doing. And, you know, sometimes we'll have cards like this that say, when it attacks, give another target creature flying. This is better than that. It doesn't itself have any evasion, but it's a 1/4, so it can attack reasonably well into other creatures. And sometimes you just need to get that one big hit in. And like I said, if you're playing a really defensive deck and you have two Phase Dolphins, they can choose each other, and neither of them can be blocked. So maybe that's a thing that comes up. Not an all-star card, but a solid common to have in this set, especially if you need to grant evasion to your cards. Evasion. Next up, Insatiable Hemophage. Okay. 3 and a black for a 3/3 Death Touch. Whenever this creature mutates, each opponent loses X life, and you gain X life, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. And it mutates for 2 and a black. Okay. So this card is cool. I like this a little bit less than some of the other mutate creatures. It is cheap, right? It's 4 mana, 3/3 Death Touch. That's a real card. Think like Venomous Hierophant. That's a solid role player, even if you ignore the self-mill. It mutates for 3 mana, which is pretty cheap, and it's a 3/3, so sometimes this will make a creature on board bigger while mutating, and you get some extra life gain. The thing is, this doesn't actually develop your board very much. It doesn't add to the board. It does grant something Death Touch, right? And the more I think about it, the more I like that 1/5 Pangolin, because that's the type of card that it holds the fort, and then if you can grant it extra abilities like Death Touch, Reach, Hexproof, God forbid, it actually just gives you a nice little engine to be able to keep mutating. So Hemophage, Insatiable Hemophage, asks that you keep mutating over and over again for it to be really good. I'm guessing it isn't uncommon, but maybe if you get multiple Hemophages, there's something there, because they would each trigger every time you mutate, and that could be really strong, but it is uncommon. Again, this doesn't give you a 2-for-1 or anything like that, like the one that makes your opponent discard, or the black creature that makes your opponent sack a creature. Those, at least while you're mutating, take something away from your opponent or add something to the board. This does not. It just affects life totals, but it's got a decent enough stat line that it's probably good enough, and I think that's fine. Couple more. Valiant Rescuer is up next. Sorry, we got to plug in. I thought I'd make it to the end without plugging in, but there we go. Valiant Rescuer is another Cyclone payoff. It's 1 and a white for a 3/1. Is that the third? Yeah, that's the third 3/1 for 2 that we've seen in this format. It is an uncommon human soldier, and it's a Cyclone payoff. Like I said, it says whenever you cycle another card for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. And then it itself has Cyclone for 2 mana, and that's why it says another card, so it doesn't trigger off Cyclone itself, right? So here's a way to make humans, and also a way to pay you off for your Cyclone deck. So this is kind of a key uncommon, I would think. It bridges the gap between 2 archetypes, the Cyclone deck and the human deck, and it is a way to produce multiple human tokens, which we were just talking about for that mythic rare, the Orzhov guy. So I expect this card to be very important in the format. 2 mana 3/1, again, it exists. Like, it's funny to have a strictly better uncommon than just another common that's floating around the set, but whatever. And this actually gives me a little hope that the Cyclone deck might actually exist. You know, this is probably the best payoff we've seen so far. The Pinger is good, the Fox is playable, but this is an actual, like, payoff. You're making legitimate tokens when you do this, and maybe if we find a mass board pump or something like that in this format, then Valiant Rescuer is going to be one of the better cards. And the fact that, you know, anytime you see an uncommon that fits into 2 very different archetypes, that's just going to be a card that goes really early in the draft and just pulls its weight in whatever archetype you end up in. And that leaves us with one more here. Migration Path. Excuse me. Migration Path is 3 and a green. It is an uncommon sorcery, and it's an explosive vegetation. It lets you search for up to 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle, and it cycles for 2 mana. So this is actually the second strictly better explosive vegetation we've had in like the last year or so. We got was it Circuitous Route, which was explosive vegetation but could also get gates. This is explosive vegetation but gets cycling, or has cycling. Green doesn't seem to care much about cycling, but again, these are generic cycling costs, so if you just need an extra cycler in your Jeskai deck or whatever, you can always play an off-color card like this. And this is a potential 3-color format, so just having mana fixing like this, even though it's expensive, is probably very relevant. It is a 2-for-1, like, sure, you're getting 2 lands, but cards like this are 2-for-1s, and they shouldn't be under valued, but they should be valued appropriately, where you got to understand that you're not affecting the board you play this, but if you can ramp yourself into some multicolor card or some game winning effect, or just ramp out a 6 or 7 drop a turn or 2 earlier, then it makes it worth running this sort of card. And if you draw this later in the game when you already have 8 or 9 mana, Cycling just really makes up for that. Cycling's good, okay? I know I've said it a million times, but Cycling is good. And, we've got one more. One more just popped up. What do we got? Barrier Breach. This is 2 and a green for an instant. Exile up to 3 target enchantments. Cycling for 2 generic mana. Really, I guess this... I'm assuming this existed as kind of a safety valve for Theros. They were like, okay, Theros is an enchantment set. We're going to push some enchantment themes. Let's just make sure that we have an answer for that. So this is similar to the Naturalize we saw earlier. That was 1 in a green, destroying artifact or enchantment, cycling for 2 mana. Look, if you need a cycling card, go for it, and sometimes this will get your opponent's enchantment. The enchantments do seem more prevalent than the artifacts here, so Barrier Breach, playable because it has cycling, not something that I'm looking to pick up very highly. Any more? Anything else want to pop up last minute? All right, we got it. Thank you for sticking around if you're already at this point. We just went through like 70 cards or something like that. I got to rest my voice for a minute because I've been talking nonstop. And I do appreciate you being here. If you saw anything about these cards that maybe I misread, maybe I misjudged, feel free to leave that in the comments below. Let me know what you are excited about in this set. It just seems like there's so much going on that it's hard to kind of parse everything and get it together. The archetypes are pretty crazy, and there's just so much going on that I have to look back over everything myself for the archetype reviews I'm going to do and see how I feel about everything. So let me know in the comments below how you're feeling. Find us on Twitter at MTG_Manarocks. Thanks for hanging out with me, and we will see you all for more Ikoria spoilers. Maybe not tomorrow, it's the weekend, but whenever they kick back up, I will see you for those spoilers as well. Thanks for watching. My name's Timothy with Manarocks. See you next time.